In this next segment of our presentation, specific to vaping, we're going to talk a little bit more about what some of the concerns are related to vaping. So people seem very confused about vaping and what's actually coming out of the vape pens. A lot of people are assuming it's just water. So we wanted to find the difference between gas, vapor, and aerosol. So gas is a substance with indefinite expansion. So when you're letting gas out of a bottle, it's usually going to keep spreading out until it's completely mixed with the air. With vapor, it can mean the same as gas, but it may also be used to describe a visible exhalation, such as steam or fog. And then an aerosol is a mixture of liquid particles suspended in gas. So instead of just mixing with the air like a pure gas, aerosols can leave drops behind. Vaping produces an aerosol, not a vapor, contrary to popular belief. E-cigarettes and vape pens allow the user to make large clouds that many think are just water vapor, but in reality, the cloud is a mixture of a lot of different chemicals that were either present in the e-liquid before, or they're produced during the heating process. A vapor is a chemical that's evaporated. An aerosol is a mixture of liquid particles suspended in a gas and can contain a lot of chemicals. So instead of just mixing with the air like a pure gas, aerosols are leaving drops behind. Which of these chemicals are found in e-cigarette aerosols? All of these chemicals, some of which are known to even cause cancer. The following compounds are on the Proposition 65 list and have been identified as mainstream or secondhand side-stream e-cigarette vapor. These are other toxic chemicals. There's other toxic chemicals as well in the vapor that can be found in the ultrafine particles that likely have cardiovascular effects. Unfortunately, e-cigarettes are not delivering pure nicotine and harmless water vaping that everyone believes they are. Third-hand smoke is a new concept. A lot of us have heard about secondhand smoke, which comes if you're around someone that's smoking a cigarette. Students are actually experiencing the effects of secondhand smoke and third-hand smoke when tobacco particles are left behind on furniture. So when chemicals from vape pens remain on surfaces and dust even after the vapor or aerosol is gone and they react with other chemicals in the environment, this forms toxic chemicals. Although we don't know yet about secondhand smoke, evidence shows that third-hand smoke is harmful, especially to children. 63% of Juul users don't know that the product that they're smoking, a Juul, contains nicotine. Always contains nicotine. This isn't a question with Juuls. All Juul products contain nicotine. Nicotine itself is a highly addictive compound, and while not all vape pens contain nicotine, most have the same chemicals and toxins. As a lot of you know, nicotine is a drug that's a stimulant, meaning it raises levels of physical or psychological activity in the body, and it's toxic at high doses. It's also highly addictive, and since it causes changes in brain chemistry quickly, it leaves the brain craving more. Nicotine is found in tobacco products, and nicotine exposure during fetal development has lasting adverse consequences for brain development. Data from studies of mice suggest that nicotine exposure during adolescence may have lasting adverse effects on brain development as well. The reaction that nicotine has in the brain results in the stimulation of pleasure centers in the brain. So when it's inhaled, nicotine enters into the brain after passing through the lungs, and then it binds to pleasure receptors in the brain. This in turn causes a release of pleasure chemicals like dopamine, and it provides the user with a temporary feeling of pleasure. This doesn't necessarily sound dangerous, but in reality, the nicotine interferes with the body's ability to experience and communicate pleasure. So nicotine use creates floods of dopamine and intense feelings. The pleasure centers in the brain adapts to drug use by sensing the extra dopamine, and then it begins to produce less of it. So this means that the user has a hard time creating natural feelings of pleasure without nicotine. So the user starts to feel like they need the nicotine just to feel normal. In addition, the pleasure centers in the brain create a memory of nicotine and an appetite for it. That appetite for nicotine, even despite its harmful consequences, is what we refer to as nicotine addiction. Nicotine is highly addictive. So what that means is the human brain can develop such a strong dependence on the drug that the nicotine user can no longer control their desire or smoking behaviors. The cycle of nicotine addiction starts with bringing nicotine into the body. In this case, it comes through the inhalation of cigarettes, hookahs, and other e-cigs and vapes. Nicotine enters the brain and activates the pleasure centers of the brain, and then after, the level of nicotine in the body drops quickly. This cycle is powered by the body's biological reaction to nicotine, and it isn't controlled by the person vaping. which is why when we're telling students, you need to stop this and it's unhealthy, they're already at the point where they're addicted. Unfortunately, nicotine doesn't just have an effect on your brain, it also has effects all over your body. So for example, using nicotine can also make your heart beat faster because it can activate your fight or flight response. Nicotine can independently cause trouble breathing and damage to your lungs outside of all the chemicals and toxins in cigarettes. Nicotine can also cause you to have increased acid reflux. It can also cause insulin resistance, making it potentially more dangerous for those with diabetes. And lastly, nicotine can even effectively impact your reproductive organs. The e-juice that is in e-cigarettes and vape pens is approved for ingestion, so swallowing, but it's not approved for inhalation. This is pretty scary that it's currently unregulated. Another thing we've recently learned about is popcorn lung. So this is a condition that damages your lungs' smallest airways. It makes you cough and feel out of breath. It shows up typically between 2 weeks and 2 months of consistent smoking. Diacetyl and a closely related compound cause popcorn lung, which is also known as constrictive bronchiolitis obliterans. This irreversible respiratory disease was named after the factory workers that were inhaling artificial butter flavor while working, causing the small airways in the lungs to become irreversibly scarred and constricted, which impaired their breathing. So diacetyl has been found in a lot of e-liquids with sweet flavors, and obviously vaping is going to make asthma symptoms a lot worse. Based on current information, we know that there are health risks when people use these products. The aerosols produced by the chemicals in e-juice enter into the user's lungs and leave a chemical residue behind. We also know that it negatively impacts the cardiovascular system. So some recent studies show that the acute use of e-cigarette impaired flow-mediated dilation, so this suggests that the e-cigarettes can lead to cardiovascular diseases. We also know that ear, eye, and throat irritation is common among e-cigarette or vape users, and perhaps most worrisome is the possibility of more young people developing an addiction to nicotine, like we talked about earlier. Vaping hurts your heart and your blood vessels by changing your blood enzymes in the same way that cigarettes do. E-cigarettes create many of the same cancer-causing chemicals that are in cigarettes. An e-cigarette vapor contains heavy metals that cause lung, liver, and heart damage. In addition, nicotine can make it harder to control your blood sugar levels if you have diabetes, like we talked about earlier. So your students are the guinea pigs for this product. Only time will tell what other harms vaping is going to produce. Since e-cigarette and vape pen products are so new and health professionals can't fast forward into the future, all of the long-term consequences of these products are impossible to predict. However, based on what we know today from research on the chemicals found in e-cigarettes, we can say that these products are not harmless to the user or the people that are around them. For close to 20 years, health professionals did not know the long-term effects of cigarette smoke either. Just imagine what else we're going to know in another 10 years when we have a fuller picture of all the health consequences. Another thing that's important to mention to students is that there's a lot of vape pen explosions. These are just some pictures. I recognize they're pretty graphic, but I think it's important to include. You can also YouTube videos and just Google pictures on your own. But we want to just make sure students understand that there's been a lot of reports of vape pens exploding and injuring the users. They can explode in people's pockets or faces, typically due to issues with the battery. So manipulation and targeting ad campaigns continue. Some of the brands behind these new products are actually the same corporations that produce traditional cigarettes. So you can see from this image right here some of those examples. Basically, these big tobacco corporations are replacing their old cigarette customers with new customers around our students' ages that they're hoping to keep for a lifetime by promoting a new product. Imagine, if you will, being a big tobacco company executive and all of your customers are looking like the folks in these pictures. Would you be worried? What would you do to make sure you kept having customers? Well, the e-cigarette industry knows that many of their customers are getting older or dying and they need to be replaced with new customers so they can make more profits. So who do you think they see as the ideal customer? Young people are the replacement. Besides the large aerosol clouds that can be made with e-cigarettes and vape pens, we talked about the 15,000 flavors of e-juice that are available. and the fact that they're using certain flavors to try to draw kids in. It's no coincidence that flavorings in tobacco products can make them more appealing, especially among young people your age. We also know that among adolescents, ages 12 to 17, e-cigarette users are 4.3 times more likely to use marijuana. Although it's originally pitched that e-cigarettes are an alternative to smoking cigarettes, research actually shows that students who start with e-cigarettes are more likely to start smoking regular cigarettes, and actually leads them to have more access and more likelihood to engage in other drugs such as marijuana.